Hello and welcome to Access Chat. We're actually delighted to welcome back Abby James. Abby is a third time appearance on Access Chat now. Third time, third job. This time you're actually representing Barclays, and we're delighted that you're representing Barclays because Barclays Access have been fantastic supporters of Access Chat over the last 6 years or so. We're in our 7th year now, and to be honest, probably wouldn't be here without that kind of long-term support. So thank you to Paul. We know you're at home suffering deeply with man flu, but you know, we're very happy to have you here representing the team, Abby. So welcome. And for those that haven't been with us for 6 years, do you want to give us a bit of a reprise of your background?
Well, thank you. Thank you for, I want to say thank you to Access Chat as well, because on behalf of the accessibility community, that's 7 years, you've given us such wonderful conversations, insights, and raised the profile. So clap back. So yeah, I'm Abby James. I've been in the assistive technology accessibility world for nearly 2 decades, combining everything from developing assistive technology, researching, user testing, and in the last few years, particularly focusing on digital accessibility, web accessibility. I've worked with policymakers, schools, universities, businesses, you name it. But now during this year, I moved to Barclays, which has been a really interesting time to change jobs. And it's working with our digital channels to make sure they are as accessible and inclusive as possible. So that's both to our customers, but also to our colleagues. Which you can imagine is a very diverse range of roles internally and externally as well. So everything from our main banking apps through to our corporate banking, investment banking platforms, huge different portfolio of projects. So it's a really interesting challenge. So I'm here today to chat with Access Chat about reflecting back on the year and looking forward to the future.
And what a year it's been. It's a year like no other. So I guess, I mean, I was having a conversation about this just before we came on air, actually. What have we learned? I mean, it's not all been negative, right? So I think, you know, what have the positives been? You know, we can talk about the negatives for sure, but actually, what are some of the positives that you found in 2020?
I think some of the positives have been around how quickly we can adapt systems and how some of the things that people with disabilities or different needs have been asking for a long time have now become mainstream. So, you know, things like captioning and working from home, all these things that we're seen as that's an additional adjustment, accommodation. Now it's just part of our lives. So I think, you know, from the disability and accessibility community, there's been some really key improvements, positives that can impact some people's lives positively. We've actually, I think, by having to make digital first the priority, the fact that we're completely reliant on digital channels for quite some of our essential services has meant that those of us who really wanted to use those digital channels have benefited from it. You know, we've seen education going online. We've seen, in my field, your banking apps and online banking being the place where you can do pretty much everything. Whereas before it might have been, well, actually, you've got to go to the branch to do X, Y, and Z. And some of our public sector services have become really streamlined and efficient, and we've demonstrated how quickly you can roll out new services. So, you know, I think there's some positives to take away from that, things that we can definitely learn from. I wouldn't want to roll back 2020 and lose everything we've learned from it.
Debra, phrase of 2020 was "you're on mute."
I know, really. It's a game that we play. Who's going to be the first speaker to not to start talking on mute? I was on a panel yesterday, and one of the speakers just kept doing it. It's so easy to do it, but I agree with Abby that, you know, we have had some blessings from 2020. I also agree, though. Please, can we not do this year again? Please, can we not? I don't want to lose, as you said, I don't want to lose what we've gained, but wow, it's been intense. And I really like you said, the captioning, now we understand more and more access issues because it's impacting the rest of the society, whereas this has been impacting people with disabilities forever. So I'm really glad. I'm starting to see more corporations focus on corporate digital responsibility as well as part of their corporate social responsibility, which gives me hope. But it is interesting because I think now when you talk about accessibility, people know what we're talking about in even in more powerful ways. I remember years ago, I've also been in the field a long time. Years ago, I remember saying to somebody, and this happened multiple times, but well, your website has to be accessible. And they're like, oh, it's accessible. You can get on 24/7. Remember when they used to think that was what accessibility was? Well, no, it's accessible. So it feels like this year, we took a real giant step forward. I understand in a lot of ways we went backwards too, but I think that I'm very, very I'm very hopeful about that as well. Antonio, I don't know if you want to, chime in here.
Well, I've seen a grow in terms of awareness, like you were saying, in terms of captioning, subtitles, people really making that more widely. But I also have seen large events where you pay a good amount of money to attend, where that was completely forgotten or taken to a kind of a free mode option that is supposed to work, but in the end doesn't work because there are technical limitations. I think there's definitely more awareness about the importance of making things accessible, but there's still we've seen that a good number of individuals are going to this direction, are more engaged on this conversation. And what I've seen interesting is events that are not necessarily relate with the industry, with accessibility, with providing support or leading conversation that relate with people with disabilities, are talking about these topics more often. So events that we have discussions around smart cities, topics that relate with design of the footpath, design of the spaces, building apps. They are starting to have more discussions on these topics by themselves. So outside the usual suspects of discussions on accessibility like we are. So I've seen a grow on that. But I think one of the areas that I haven't seen that much progress, unfortunately, and considering that we are all now buying online, is at the level of marketing and online sales. That is a space that I have seen this year as an opportunity for that space to understand the importance, but I haven't seen the grow as I expected, considering the opportunity that is there.
Yeah, very well said. And, Antonio, you made me think about this, and I'm going to be terrible and use Abby and Neil, who are AT experts. But another thing that I saw was people starting to understand how the community of people with disabilities use assistive technology. And I know that I was really proud that Rosemary Musacchio, who on my team, she's our chief accessibility officer. She also happens to be a woman that is nonverbal. And she did a keynote speaker with two other very talented women, Suzanne, the chief accessibility officer, Suzanne Montgomery from AT&T, and Jessica from Microsoft. And the audience, as she had to pre-record her answers because she's nonverbal. And of course, the very first question she went to answer, the technology didn't want to behave, but we had a backup plan and then it worked. But people were blown away watching the process. And so that made me hopeful. But There's still people, including people in our audience at Access Chat, that don't believe that the community needs assistive technology. And I'm always puzzled by that, because assistive technology, you know, if you make your website fully accessible so that I don't have to use my assistive technology, which, by the way, I want to use my assistive technology if I use it. I actually have to use that assistive technology to navigate to your website. And so there's a lot of confusion being introduced by our community, the accessibility community, about assistive technology. And I was just wondering if, you know, that was something that y'all wanted to comment on. And then I know, Neil, you had a comment too.
So that's fine. We're actually, Abby's been on here so long, she's a pro, she's queuing herself up. So absolutely. The first thing I was going to say was what we've got now is an increased awareness, but it's awareness versus know-how. So what we've now got to address is the know-how, because now that people know that it's a thing and know that it's a need, we now need to get them to the point where they actually are competent in addressing that need, and consistently. And I think that obviously assistive tech has a part to play in that. I use assistive tech in lots of different scenarios on a daily basis, whether that be simple settings or the sort of more traditional text-to-speech and word prediction and so on that Abby and I have been working on for those 2 decades that she mentioned. So I think that if you rely on assistive tech, it's great to build assistive tools into your products. And we've seen lots of that happening during COVID, but that's not creating an inclusive ecosystem, right? The inclusive ecosystem is still through your device, through your operating system. So if you really need the assistive tech, then you're going to need to be able to use it on your device to be able to get to the websites, the products, the services, etc. So by all means, build inclusive features, but don't stop being accessible, because actually your inclusive feature might not be the one that someone needs. But if you design something to be accessible, it will be interoperable with the assistive tech.
Yeah, that's really good points. And I think, you know, with two things, there's two sides to this. Is there's us trying to deliver services and technology and awareness, and you know, there's the really big challenge of how do we get the technical staff up to speed and up to standard. And one of the things we found at Barclays, and we're really ramping up now, and we're really focusing on, is actually making sure our core components, our core design system, our documentation, all the designs have accessibility from day one. You know, that inclusive design process is there, because what actually happens with awareness but without knowledge is it makes more work, because people attempt to do them wrong. You have to go round in cycles. But actually, you know, great to have awareness, but you've got to have knowledge as well. You know, there's IAAP, there's Neil's great work with within the university sector. I can't remember the name of it now.
Institute of Coding, but also
Institute of Coding. Yeah, and the work we've done, I've done with the University of Southampton with free courses. We need to get that all embedded as, you know, what we expect when we're employing developers and designers, that they really understand what inclusive design is and accessible development. But we also face, you know, there's a different challenge of actually the people who can benefit from accessibility and assistive technology. And, you know, one of the things that we managed to do during COVID at Barclays was we have a flag on any customers that we think might be vulnerable or need extra services, and we pulled out to them. We made sure they had priority on the phone banking systems. We offered them services like home cash delivery, but we know we're not reaching all our customers. We know that number is quite small because people don't come forward and say to us. And actually, you know, one of the lessons to learn, one of the things that we've still got to learn from 2020 is, as we have reduced our face-to-face contact with customers and clients, is how do we find out what they need? You know, we've talked a lot in the community about having to do remote user testing now, but actually that ad hoc for us, that's, you know, our face-to-face banking staff in the branch picking up on what customers are saying, and explaining to them how they could use the app or how they can change their settings on their computer. All that's gone at the moment, that face-to-face support. So as a community, sort of one of the lessons we still have to learn is, how do we get everybody embracing all these wonderful tools that are out there, but also how do we do that when we can't see them face to face? We can't actually engage with them through digital anyway. So then, that's a negative from 2020 for me, but something to learn from.
Abby, I was in the banking industry for 25 years, and I know that I left the banking industry when I became an entrepreneur in 2000. So it's been 20 years since talking about 2 decades. That's how much older I am than you guys. Anyway, don't get distracted, Debra. But I remember when I worked in banking, we always were trying to educate our customers on how to bank with us in the most inexpensive way for us as a bank. And I'm being a little cheeky, but we want to support their needs, but we really wanted them to use our technology. Once again, a long time ago, I've been in banking. But it seems like with COVID-19 and us all coming home to stay safe, that some of that stuff we were doing in the banking industry, really trying to guide the customers to the technology online, some of that is also accelerated during COVID-19, because if customers I know that got used to going into their branches, and it was almost a social activity for some of our elderly people, and all of that was stopped. So I was just curious, did you see from that perspective customers getting more engaged with the technology? I know that Barclays is really good about that. I wish Barclays was in the United States as a bank, because I would.
Across the sector and within Barclays, the amount of online banking transactions, through the app, it's just exponentially grown, because it's just keeping it all working while everybody has been completely reliant on has been a huge focus. And so it's making sure really that digital is, and I think as people have started to use it, there's a lot more services and transactions that can be done through it. So even using video calling through the app, like a secure communication process, making it easy so you don't have to go through phone banking. That's all really taken off, and we're looking at new forms of communication. Likewise, the other side of that is actually, as a team, it's a bit more of a stick, because before it was like, well, they can go into the bank, we can just say go to the bank, and now we're like, no, you've got to make sure that it is accessible, that it works for everybody, which is a continued challenge. It's always a carrot and stick process, but I think that that is one of the good things that can come out of COVID, that it's really put, as well as the wider picture of inclusion as a whole topic, as the widest definition, is very much high up on the agenda, both within Barclays and other corporate organisations. But it's really like, no, we've got to make sure this works for everybody, because this is the only option now.
Yeah, I think that has been such a sea change, and it's not just about the products and services we're building now, but it's starting to percolate into what are we going to build in the future. So if we are going to to use the phrase build back better, what are we thinking about? What's the banking sector thinking about? What do you think the opportunities are for us to take what we've learned and feed in? Some of that might be, changing corporate attitudes and culture towards inclusion. Some of that might be the change in technical processes and mindsets or whatever. What do you see short, medium, and long term will be the stuff that we can do to improve?
So I think one of the areas that Barclays had already started to look at 2019, but is really coming to keen focus, is actually looking at our suppliers and the technology we buy in, which particularly affects our colleagues. Again, they're working from home. tens of thousands of people working from home within Barclays. We've had to really change how they're supported, but we've looked at our internal systems and found that, you know, a significant amount have quite, you know, major accessibility barriers. So we're working with those suppliers, highlighting the ones we really need to work from, and you know, as a lot of big corporates like Neil you work for and I work for, you, we take accessibility seriously and embed it within ourselves, but if what you're building on and what you're using has its limitations, we really need to go out to those private companies which are outside of some of the stricter regulations and laws, and make them understand and raise their awareness. So it's about, you know, spreading the word as we do through activities like this and other events. But I think that is something that we really need to make sure that we continue the focus on. I think that's the big challenge in terms of building back better. It's really about how do we get that disabled customer and colleagues' voices into building back better. Building back better has got to be better for everybody, and if that means tighter regulations or ensuring that digital and first is actually digital and inclusive first as well, and that knowledge is really built into every requirement, that's really important. So I think 2021 will be different, won't be like 2020, but I think we could be sitting here this time next year going, oh, can't do another one of those again, just because the challenges are going to continue. Yes. But I think that, and that's also, we've got to learn that we can't all run at 150%, and we can't build technology super fast rate all the time. We've got to actually stand back and think, okay, if this is the new normal, then how do we make sure that our community is embedded with almost decision making, that design process of the whole community, and to make sure that everybody who's involved in now these digital channels and digital platforms really understands their needs. And that's not just from a corporate world as well. You know, previously, when the last time I was on Access Chat, I was talking about public sector regulations. They're facing a similar challenge, that actually everybody who builds an app and a website needs to understand how they can impact somebody's life.
Wow. Abby, I could sit and listen to you just forever. You are so brilliant. I'm always amazed by you. But I was going to ask a question, which of course you immediately answered before I could get it out. But, you know, it's interesting with the really making sure the right people are invited to the conversations almost, right? Which we're all trying to do. And I know the current president of the United States, who shall not be named by me, started attacking diversity and inclusion, which I thought was fascinating. And in a way, maybe the right word is not attacking, even though we are using that. But what this person said was, all people should be equal, in which, by the way, I agree with. All people should be equal. So we were almost not officially making it illegal to show preference to some people over other people, but you were going to get in trouble. And actually, we even set up a whistleblower thing so we could tattle on each other, which, by the way, is not the United States that I live in. So, but it was also fascinating at the same time, because we saw a couple of our corporations actually get entangled in this. And so the president was doing multiple executive orders about this. And I understand, once again, that as human beings, we should all be treated equally, but we're not. So we have to be more deliberate about making sure that women are included, from the intersectionality, the African Americans, brown and black, and LGBT, and all the stuff we know, right? But there were two corporations in the United States, Microsoft and Wells Fargo, that announced that they were going to be very deliberately hiring brown and black talented workers. And they got in trouble with these executive orders, because you're not allowed to show preference to brown or black. So it was interesting. And I get that in the future, we want everything to be equal, but it's not now. And so how do we, so it was interesting watching that attack and allowed us to all come together and fight together for the cause. But how do we, once again, make sure that the right people are in the room so that we don't, just go right back to the old way? And you talked about it a little bit, but I just think that's something that we really need to continue to explore. And I'll make you one more comment, Abby, for you to think about this, and Antonio and Neil as well. But I remember one time I've been saying a lot too, and so have others. Let's be more deliberate. If you're a man and you see a panel of only men, push back and say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be on the panel. If you are doing a panel and they're not going to have captioning, sorry, I can't be on your panel. I mean, and you're seeing this already. You're seeing men be allies to women. You're seeing accomplices and things like that. But it does feel like we have to be very, very deliberate. And I was saying that one time, and Caroline Casey, who we all love, said, I agree. I'm going to give my seat at the table up. And somebody said, no, bring more chairs to the table. But the reality is, that's what we've been trying to do. And the reality is most certain people don't ever get to that table. So how do we, with the complexity and the nuances and everything that's happening, how do we make sure that the right people continue to be at the table and we continue this behavior that so many of us are trying to do now? And I know I'm asking you gigantic societal problems. So I can't wait for the answer. Yes.
Yes, on a Friday afternoon. Yeah, really, really, Judge. I think, yeah, and it's been challenging thing. The whole inclusion debate is so mixed, and I think that's it's one of the things that keeps us all going with the accessibility community is trying to get people engaged, but also it's so complex. And I think even from a personal perspective, I've been in that situation where people have called out a panel. But actually, I knew that of the 4 people, 3 of them had disabilities, but only 1 was visible. And so we also have to be, careful in the disability area, that so many people have hidden disabilities, and so many people are vulnerable or disabled. But we know they need help, but they might not identify as that. So it's also the identification problem. So I think we need more people to engage and realize that it's not just a would be nice. It's a right. It's not just please tell us. Why not use this end of year period in December to leave some feedback? And whenever I'm doing user testing, I always say, no feedback is bad feedback. I don't want to hear yeah, it's all right. I want to hear exactly what you think and any information you give. So it's about how do we engage everybody. We have the structure to adapt things to help people with disabilities. We can prioritize them. We have expertise in the field. We can bring people to the table who can explain those needs and requirements. And it's about educating people in the social model of disability, about making people realize when they are building environments, whether it's buildings or whether it's an app or whether it's a skill for the speech device in my room I can't say the name of, that you might be disabling somebody if you are creating that environment and turning it around. And with all diversity and inclusion, it's about, well, are you disabling somebody? Are you excluding people? Because it's not the people themselves that are choosing to want inclusion, it's you being exclusive.
Absolutely. And I've been there where I've had people calling out our entirely disabled panels for not looking disabled enough. It's like, oh, sorry, are we not the right type of disabled? Oh dear. Yeah. So yeah, I'm fully with you. And yeah, not everyone wants to be talking about themselves all the time. They're not me. Know thyself. But absolutely, it's I think that the sort of the stuff you talked about as well about not identifying as disabled is really really key. You know, we talk about my parents a lot not identifying as disabled, because older people, as you acquire conditions, you don't suddenly acquire the mindset that you're disabled, or it takes you a long time to adjust to the idea that the thing that you're struggling with is a disability. So I think that if we frame services as inclusive and easy to use and show the benefits without going, oh, this is a special service for disabled people, then that large cohort of people that don't identify as being disabled are much more likely to engage with it. And I think that's one of the benefits that's come out of this year, because we're having to do that inclusivity, because everybody's being forced to go online, and although some of it is really painful, because some of that, that innovation in services has led to some fairly lumpy digital experiences. They are iterating really quickly, and they're improving significantly really quickly. So I think you wanted to ask us some questions.
Yeah. So wonderful chat as always. So I suppose when I'm reflecting back on 2021, I sort of feel like we're a bit like SpaceX at the moment. We've got these prototype rockets, we put loads of fuel in them, and we're nearly at that point of lighting the rocket, and all these experiences we've had, it's like, where can we go from here? And so I suppose it's like, what are your predictions for 2021? Looking back on where you were a year ago and thinking, well, actually, are we on the same path for accessibility, or has this year completely changed our priorities and where we see the accessibility and assistive technology community going? Have we diverged completely?
Am I taking the first shot at that? Well, that's a big question. It's certainly actually,
she's asking us hard questions now.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's fair. I think it's massively accelerated the adoption, and I think that will change the landscape, because I think larger companies are going to get into the game. But I think that's only part of it, because I think the other part that I am seeing is the stuff we talked about that Barclays are engaged in, that we're engaged in through communities like Valuable 500, which is that strategic leadership is getting engaged in this, and that has changed, and that will continue to be a game changer. And I think that whilst a few of us might have liked that to happen previously, now we can see it's happening, and I think that really is as a result of a change in the sort of landscape of technology, how we do business, and society. So there's really significant changes at the end of this exhausting year. So yeah, yes, there's tech, but there's all of this other stuff too, and a lot of the stuff that has changed for me in the world that I'm in is not about the tech. It's about the willingness of other businesses and other parts of businesses and other functions to engage on the topic, and that they see that it is valuable, necessary, required, and that means that you're doing stuff at a totally different scale. And then we need to not just do that at scale within our own companies, but across companies and together. And so yes, that's changed.
No, this year I've seen some new organizations joining Purplelight up, and while looking at that, I started to observe the way our employees of certain companies started to go on board in a very organic way. So there was a kind of a trigger from organization, and employees just naturally follow that path. So it was not just the group who was part of the Purplelight, it was all the employees of that organization joining. So sometimes organizations need to create this kind of a trigger, and people will naturally follow up. They are just waiting for a moment just to do it, and they feel, oh yes, this is something that we need to do. And following that, I see something that I would expect to happen more over the next year is more organizations are going to push back at the procurement level. From, and it could be from a startup that is trying to pitch them for a service. It could be a large software vendor that is telling them, oh, we have a big software solution for you to manage your online events, and organizations are going to ask more and more, is the software and the services that you are selling me accessible, or this is going to have a negative impact on my customers or on my employees? This question is going to be more on the table. And if you are listening to us, it's important that you start to realize that don't bother to reaching us out if your software for some reason is going to exclude people. Don't even try. Go back, fix your problems, and then come back to us. And that's, I close my for now.
Well, and what I've seen, and I'm very excited about this, and I've certainly seen this in the US. We cannot have accessibility conversations in a vacuum, which we have been doing for years. I know here in the States, we've been very bad about that. We have groups that are focused on disability inclusion, groups that are focused on disability inclusion from the B2B, and we have IAAP, for example, in the United States, even though they're a global, and they're working hard on being more global. But the conversations aren't together. We are having them there are these major gaps in the conversation. So one thing that has happened in the States this year because of COVID is that we are having these, well, and because of, Black Lives Matter and Me Too, and, the United States trying to figure out who are we? And, who are we in as part of the world as well? But the disability inclusion and the diversity and inclusion, really inclusion as a big word now with accessibility, it's got to come together. And I'm seeing very interesting things. And I'm watching this and thinking, is it just where you're looking, Debra? Is this why you're seeing this? But I'm actually seeing young, diverse women in the United States that are working for major brands, especially, really stepping up and taking the microphone in ways I've never seen before. I'm working really hard to support these women to make sure I'm inviting them into conversations, and others are doing it as well. But something's happening, especially with women in these conversations, not just women, because men are engaged too, but something very important I think is happening, because we keep having these conversations about accessibility in a vacuum. But if you're a corporation and you want Barclays, Barclays and Atos is, y'all have so many things that you have to do, and there's so many moving parts. But corporations understanding, which Neil talked about this a little bit too, that we have expectations of you, and Antonio talked about this. We have the wonderful, valuable 500. Which some countries are not supporting it. I'd like to see my country and the leaders in my country doing a better job of supporting organizations like Valuable 500, where the CEOs are coming together to have a global conversation, have national conversations. But so I think a lot of the COVID-19 actually pushed us forward to have to solve some of these problems. Now we're understanding, seriously, WITI, Women in Technology Institute in the United States, they had an entire 3-day panel about inclusion and accessibility and sustainability. So they pulled all the things together, and I've never seen such diversity. So and the last thing I want to say, I think many of the corporations in the United States, whether they're global or whether they're national, are starting to see what we've been saying all along. You have to join these conversations. You have to include us. You have to hire us. You have to make things accessible, not just from a US perspective or wherever your flag is flying, but you have to take care of your entire geo footprint. If you're employing people with disabilities in the US and the UK, and you're not doing it in India where you're located, we're noticing. So I think that is something that has happened that I'm excited about, and I think it's going to continue to push us all forward too, those nuances.
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting to reflect back and see that the one thing we knew was always critical is leadership, and getting senior leadership, or whether it's global leaders involved. And Barclays has an ambition to be the most inclusive and accessible FTSE company, and that means that it's trickled down in all our objectives, it's embedded within our compliance structure. So that's how we've done it. But I think we're really interesting to pick up on, Deborah, is actually it's that groundswell as well. We've now got people entering the workplace who are, I hate the word digital natives, but I have a teenager. For them, they're just like, well, why wouldn't you do this? Why can't I do whatever job I want? Why haven't you made this app that can change colours and change the font size and do this, that, and all these wonderful things? So to them, that they're sort of coming into the workplace and reflecting on these barriers and going, well, why are you doing this? And it's about making sure their voices are there. But really reflecting back, it's been a really challenging year. So I'm going to pose one final question. What are your New Year's resolutions? Come on, Neil, your turn.
I think Deborah's was to find the mute button.
I know, really. Consistently.
Oh, I don't know. Is it to say yes more or no more? I can't decide, because I've said yes to an awful lot of things, and I'm pretty tired, but at the same time, through saying yes, it's making these connections. My New Year's resolution is actually to help push more of the people working around me into the foreground, and let them take some of the responsibility and the credit for the great work that they're doing, so that we can have more people there adding to our voices. So that's what I'm going to do, and that enable me to say yes and no.
Yeah, but that's a beautiful one. Antonio, you want to go next? We'll stay with the theme.
Something, one thing that I need to do more. Okay, I really need to make sure that I read more. Okay, I have so many things to read, so I definitely need to catch up with my reading that is really, really late. The other is, I've been reflecting a lot in relation to some of activities that I do online. And one of the things that I really need to do is I need to. I know it's not easy because the source of information are not easy to find, and it is about sharing more diverse content coming from different parts of the world that relate with our favorite topics. It's very difficult. Sometimes it's not easy to find in the normal sources. So that's something that I really want to do. We know that the web is naturally in favor of your country, Debra. In terms of communication and news. The US is basically driving many of these conversations happening in the online space, and sometimes we get this idea: oh, there's so many things, so many bad things happening in social media, but that somehow relates more with the United States than with the other countries. So because probably if we go to other parts of the world, probably we don't observe that level of negativity. So my resolution is more to focus more and trying to find sources and people from other parts, and be more proactively sharing content from other parts of the world, not from the current ones that I've been using.
Ooh, that's a really good one. And I think that's so important. I've often said that when I first got into this field and I started being invited around to speak, it was because I was American, and because a lot of countries just figured we had gotten it so much figured out because we're really good about bragging about what we do. There's so many good things about the US. I'm not going to talk about what's not working right now, but there's a lot of good things about this beautiful country that I live in. I'm proud to be an American. But mine is a little different. And I hadn't really thought about it, Abby. That's a great question. But one thing that I struggled a lot with in 2020 was this illusion that I had. I don't know where I got it from, that I had any control at all of my life at all. And I've been working on understanding I have zero control. And I think that is a theme that I will continue. I've already been doing what Neil said, and I love his, put other people in the foreground. I've been really doing that well this year, but understanding that I have no control of anything and being very deliberate about, and I've always been doing this, but I'm going to be more deliberate about only doing things I love and that speak to me. And I already, I'll work with people if I feel really good energy from a person. I already will do whatever I can to help them. But when I'm feeling energy coming that I don't want to play in, I had this happen yesterday with somebody, and I just no longer am going to step into situations that I know that I'm going to regret. In the past, I guess it goes back to what Neil said, that you say yes too often. I said yes to almost everything this year, to almost every speaking engagement, but I think I'm going to be more careful with yes in 2021.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. And every single one of those resolutions, I thought, yeah, I'm with you on that one. And I think the phrase I've heard of 2020 is understanding, is it dislocation of expectations? So we've all got to just have no expectations and we'll all be fine. And I suppose that's something I'm going to try and continue. And I suppose, and all of you, same theme. I think one of the things I'm very aware of is we've lost the face-to-face networking. I'm not a writer. I can't write, so I don't blog. I occasionally, get on Twitter, make some spelling mistakes. But, that face-to-face communication of bringing people into conversations, mentoring new people and getting them involved in the community. And so I think my resolution is going to be to find a way of pulling people in and getting them exposed to the community. They're not just the people shouting the loudest and being there, no, this is WCAG and this is this, and making sure we have some way of bringing in the new blood and sharing what they're doing without relying on them speaking English and being a great writer and having great technical knowledge. And that's my one to ponder to how to do that in the new year.
Let me know when you've got it worked out, because I'll be joining you. So
I'll probably be on New Year's Eve going,
Well, I've failed for 4 decades to do the read more one, so I'm not going to make that resolution, because I know I've got a shelf full of unread books, and some of them, the spines have faded because they've been on the shelf so long that the sunlight has eaten into them. It's been a real pleasure, as always. So I have to thank our supporters, Barclays Access, My Clear Text and Microlink, for continuing to keep us on air. And we look forward to you joining us on Twitter on Tuesday. Thank you very much.
I will be there.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you for everything you're doing. We appreciate you, and we love Barclays. So we always love Paul. So thank you.
Get well.
Thank you for a wonderful chat.